The morning they let me out of Riverbend Correctional, it was raining. Not a dramatic storm, just that thin, miserable drizzle that soaks through everything and makes the world look like it's been left out too long. I stood at the gate with a plastic bag containing my reading glasses, a worn Bible, my daughter's last letter, and $4,300 I'd saved over 5 years working in the prison laundry. That was everything I had at 62 years old. My name is Sylvia Marsh, and I'd spent 5 years in a federal correctional facility for a crime my own son-in-law committed. I'm not going to spend too long on the trial. It still makes my hands shake to think about it. The short version is this. My son-in-law, a man I had welcomed into my family, had been running a Medicare billing fraud through the home health agency where I worked as office manager. When federal investigators came, he handed them my signature on documents I had never seen. My attorney, a tired man who smelled of cigarettes and seemed perpetually surprised to find himself in a courtroom, told me to take a plea deal. I told him I was innocent. He said that didn't matter as much as I thought it did. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. My daughter sat in the back row and didn't look at me once. On the drive from Riverbend to the bus station, the corrections officer who processed my release, a younger woman with kind eyes, said, "You take care of yourself now." I thanked her. I didn't know where I was going to sleep that night. I had one plan. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was the only thing that had kept me upright through 5 winters in that place. I was going to visit my husband's grave. Walter had died 14 months into my sentence. Heart failure, they said. My daughter called the warden's office to inform them. I was not allowed to attend the funeral. I received a sympathy card signed by 3 corrections officers I barely knew. Walter and I had been married 31 years. He used to bring me coffee before I was even fully awake, always with exactly 1 sugar, always in the blue mug, because he knew it was my favorite. For 5 years I had carried the image of that blue mug the way other women carry photographs. The bus from Riverbend dropped me in downtown Columbus at noon. I went straight to a florist on High Street, a small place squeezed between a dry cleaner and a nail salon. I bought 7 yellow roses, Walter's favorite color, and asked the young man behind the counter for directions to Greenlawn Cemetery. He looked at my plastic bag and my prison-issue jacket and didn't ask any questions. Just wrote the bus numbers on a paper napkin and said, 2 transfers, takes about 40 minutes. It took me nearly 2 hours because I got on the wrong bus and had to double back. By the time I walked through Greenlawn's iron gates, the drizzle had stopped, but everything was still wet and the smell of cut grass and damp earth was so strong it almost knocked me sideways. A groundskeeper in an orange vest was raking leaves near the entrance. He pointed me toward the older section without me having to ask twice. Walter's grave was simpler than I'd imagined. We had talked vaguely over the years about what we each wanted. Nothing elaborate. He always said, "Just a flat stone, Sylvie. I don't need a monument." He got his flat stone. Granite, grey, with his name and dates and the words beloved husband and father carved below. I stood there for a long time without saying anything. The words I had rehearsed in my bunk for 5 years evaporated completely. I just knelt down and pulled a few stray weeds from the edges of the stone and placed the roses in the small holder bolted to the base and cried in the ugly, silent way you cry when you run out of the energy to make noise about it. I don't know how long I was there before I noticed the child. She was maybe 7, perhaps 8 years old, small for her age, with dark braids and a puffy green coat that had seen better days. She was crouched behind the headstone 2 plots over, watching me with the frank, unguarded curiosity that only very young children have. When she saw me notice her, she didn't run. She just straightened up a little. "Hello," I said. My voice came out rougher than I expected. 5 years of not having much reason to use it gently. "Hello," she said back, very formal, very serious. "Are you here with someone, sweetheart?" She pointed across the path toward a maintenance shed about 100 yards away. "My grandpa, he works here." She paused, then added, as if this required clarification, "He's the head groundskeeper." Does he know you're over here? He knows I walk around. She said it with the confidence of a child who has negotiated this freedom fair and square. I know all the graves in this section. I come here after school. I sat back on my heels and looked at her properly. There was something self-possessed about her that you don't often see in children that age, like she'd spent a lot of time in the company of adults and had decided most of them were manageable. My name is Sylvia, I said. Whose grave is this? Did you know him? She shook her head. I know his name, though. I know everybody's names. She came closer and looked at the stone. Walter Marsh. He died 3 years ago. He was my husband. She looked at me then, really looked, the way children do when they're deciding if you're telling the truth. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she sat down cross-legged on the wet grass beside me without being invited, the way children also do when they've made up their mind about someone. I'm Addie, she said. My grandpa's name is Raymond. Our last name is Okafor. We sat quietly for a moment. She didn't seem to feel the need to fill silences, which I appreciated. Has anyone been tending this grave? I asked. I was thinking about my daughter. Whether she had come, whether she'd brought flowers, whether any part of her had kept faith with Walter's memory the way I hadn't been able to. Addie's expression shifted, just slightly, a small hesitation that on a grown woman I would have recognized immediately as the look of someone deciding how much to say. Sometimes people come, she said carefully, but not for flowers. What do you mean? She picked at the hem of her coat. I probably shouldn't say. Addie, I kept my voice gentle. I've been away for 5 years. I couldn't visit. I don't know what's happened here. If something happened at my husband's grave, I'd really like to know. She looked toward the shed. Her grandfather was still raking, too far away to hear us. About a year ago, she said very quietly, some men came at night. 2 of them. Grandpa told my mum about it because he was upset. I heard him on the phone. She glanced at me. He doesn't know I heard. I kept my breathing steady. What kind of men? In suits. Grandpa said they looked like lawyers or bank people. They had a letter that said they were authorized to access the grave for, she screwed up her face, remembering, for retrieval of personal effects. In the middle of the night. Grandpa said it was almost midnight. He was here late because there'd been a problem with one of the water lines. She pulled her coat tighter. He told them it wasn't proper procedure, that they needed to come during business hours with documentation from the county. But they had a paper with an official-looking seal, and they gave him an envelope. She paused. He didn't tell my mum how much was in it. The roses I brought were too yellow against the grey afternoon, too bright. I stared at them and tried to think clearly. Did they open the grave? I asked. No. Grandpa said they went to the grave and spent a long time there, but when he checked afterward, the ground hadn't been disturbed. He thought maybe they were looking for something above the ground, in the base maybe, or behind the stone. She frowned. He felt bad about it afterward. That's why he told my mum. He said something felt wrong, but he needed the money. I asked her if she remembered anything else. She thought carefully. She was that kind of child, methodical, not rushing to fill in what she didn't know. The car was black. A Cadillac, Grandpa said, and one of the men called the other one Garrett. I thanked her. She stood up, brushed the grass off her coat, and said, I hope you find out what you need to find out. Then she walked back toward the shed with the unhurried confidence of someone who has made a meaningful contribution and knows it. I sat with Walter's grave for another hour. By the time I left, I had $4,300 in a plastic bag and the name Garrett turning over and over in my mind like a stone in a tumbler. The name meant something. I just needed to remember what. I found a room at an extended stay off I-270, $68 a night. Weekly rate available, coffee maker in the room. I laid out everything I had on the bed and made a list on the notepad by the phone. I had been office manager at Crestview Home Health Associates for 11 years. I knew every contract, every billing code, every vendor relationship. When the federal investigation began, the documents they used against me were purchase orders and service agreements that bore my signature, but that I had never signed. My attorney had argued that the signatures were forgeries. The government's handwriting expert disagreed. What I had never been able to understand, what had kept me awake through 5 years of narrow bunks and fluorescent lighting, was why. Why go to the trouble of forging my name? My son-in-law was the CFO. He had authority over far more documents than I did. He didn't need my signature to do what he did, unless he needed someone to take the fall, and unless someone else needed it to be me specifically. I had testified in my own defense that 3 months before the investigation began, I had discovered a discrepancy in our Medicare billing records, a pattern of services billed for patients who, according to my own notes, had been discharged or had passed away. I had printed out the records. I had put them in a folder and left them on my desk with a note to discuss with management. 2 days later, the folder was gone. No one had ever explained to me what happened to that folder. At the extended stay, I opened my laptop. My daughter had sent it to Riverbend near the end of my sentence, a gesture that had moved me even as I didn't know what to make of it, and started searching. My son-in-law had divorced my daughter 8 months after my conviction. He had remarried. He was now living in Scottsdale, Arizona, running what appeared to be a medical billing consultancy. His LinkedIn profile described him as a healthcare compliance expert. I stared at that for a long time. I searched for Crestview Home Health Associates. The company had been dissolved shortly after the federal investigation. The founding partners, there had been 3 of them, had settled civil charges without admitting wrongdoing. One had retired to Florida. One had relocated to Nashville. The third, a man named Dr. Gideon Price, had gone on to become the chief medical officer of a regional hospital network headquartered in Cincinnati. I searched for Garrett and Crestview and got nothing useful. I searched for Garrett and Medicare fraud Columbus and still got nothing. Then I searched for Garrett and Crestview Home Health in the federal court records database, and I found him. Garrett Foss. He had been listed as an outside financial consultant retained by Crestview during the period in question. He had given a brief deposition during the investigation. His testimony, which I found summarized in the court documents, had confirmed that the billing irregularities were consistent with actions taken by office management. He had identified my signature on 2 key documents. I read that twice. Garrett Foss had testified against me, and now someone named Garrett had come to my husband's grave at midnight, apparently looking for something. I didn't sleep much that night. I sat at the little table by the window and wrote down everything I could remember from those last months at Crestview. Every strange conversation, every document that seemed out of place, every time someone had been in my office when they didn't need to be. In the morning I called the cemetery. Raymond Okafor answered on the 3rd ring. When I told him who I was and why I was calling, there was a very long silence. "My granddaughter told you," he said finally. It wasn't a question. "She didn't betray you," I said. "She's a perceptive child, and I think she knew something was wrong." Another silence. Then, quietly, "Mrs. Marsh, I've thought about that night more times than I care to admit." He agreed to meet me. We sat in a diner near the cemetery that afternoon. A thin, careful man in his 60s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the look of someone who has been carrying a weight he never consented to carry. He told me what Addie had already told me in more detail. 2 men, both in dark suits, arriving at 11:45 on a Tuesday night with a document bearing the seal of a law firm he didn't recognize. The letter stated that the firm represented the interests of the deceased's estate and that they had legal authorization to retrieve documents stored within the grave marker base. "Within the marker base," I repeated. "There's a small compartment," Raymond said. He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. "Some of the older monuments in that section have them, not common anymore, small enough for a folded document or a key. I'd never had occasion to open the one on your husband's stone." And they opened it. They tried, had tools with them, but it was sealed with something stronger than the standard lock. a secondary mechanism I wasn't familiar with. They worked at it for about 20 minutes and then gave up. He looked at me steadily. They said they'd be back. Did they come back? Not yet, he paused. Mrs. Marsh, who were those men? What's in that compartment? I don't know yet, I said, but I intend to find out. I went back to the grave that afternoon with Raymond. He brought a set of specialized tools from the maintenance shed and worked at the base of Walter's stone with the patience of a man accustomed to working slowly. It took him nearly 30 minutes. The compartment was about the size of a hardback book. Inside was a sealed freezer bag, and inside that was a USB drive and a folded sheet of paper. The paper was in Walter's handwriting. Sylvie. If you're reading this, then things went the way I was afraid they would. I've been holding on to this because I didn't know what to do with it, and I was afraid of what would happen if it came out while you were still inside. By the time you find this, you'll be out. That's the only reason I'm not sorry I waited. The drive has everything. 3 years of correspondence between Garrett Foss and Gideon Price. The billing scheme was Price's idea. Foss handled the financial architecture, and your son-in-law was their inside man. They needed a full person with authority over records. They chose you. I found the files 18 months ago. I went to a lawyer. He told me to sit on it until your appeal was exhausted, because if we moved too early, they'd have time to cover tracks. Then I got sick. I put everything here because I trusted Stone more than paper and more than people. I'm sorry I wasn't enough to fight them for you. I hope this is enough. Love always, Walter. I sat down on the wet grass and held that piece of paper with both hands and didn't try to stop the crying. Raymond stood a respectful distance away and said nothing. Eventually, I folded the paper back up. I put it and the USB drive in my coat pocket and stood up. I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't an investigator. I was a 62-year-old woman in a prison-issue jacket with $4,300 and a USB drive and a dead husband who had loved me enough to build me a way out of the dark. It would have to be enough to start. I called my daughter that evening. We hadn't spoken in 2 years. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she'd been waiting longer than she was willing to admit. Mum. Her voice was careful. Nadine. I hadn't let myself say her name in so long that it sat strangely in my mouth. I need to tell you some things. And then I need to ask for your help. She was quiet for a moment. Then, okay. She drove to Columbus the next morning. We sat in my small room at the extended stay and I showed her Walter's letter and told her everything. She read the letter twice. Then she put it down on the table and pressed her hands flat against the surface and breathed carefully for a while. I believed him, she said. She meant her ex-husband. When they showed me the documents, I believed them. I know. I didn't come to the trial. I know. Mum, Nadine. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. Your father figured it out. He left us the way through. Let's use it. She knew a lawyer, not a criminal defense attorney, but a civil litigator named Barbara who had gone to law school with Nadine's college roommate and who, when Nadine called her that afternoon and explained the situation, said she'd look at the materials that evening and call us in the morning. Barbara called at 7:45 a.m. Where did your husband get these files? Was the first thing she said. I don't know exactly, I said. My best guess is my son-in-law. Walter wasn't a technical man, but he was persistent. If he found a way into those records, he would have copied everything. The correspondence on this drive is extraordinary, she said. Foss and Price communicated in a way that suggests they believed they were protected. They were not careful. A pause. Mrs. Marsh, I want to bring in a colleague who specializes in federal whistleblower cases. I also think we should contact the HHS Office of Inspector General directly, rather than going through local channels. Are you prepared for this to take some time? I've already taken 5 years, I said. I can take a little more. It took 8 months. I won't pretend those 8 months were simple. There were days when I woke up in that extended stay room convinced that nothing would come of it, that men like Garrett Foss had enough money and enough lawyers to outlast any amount of evidence. There were days when I wanted to get on a bus to Scottsdale and do something I would have regretted considerably. Nadine kept me anchored. She came every other weekend. She brought groceries and sat with me at the small table, and we talked, in the way we hadn't since before everything fell apart. She told me what it had been like watching me get convicted. I told her what it had been like watching her turn away. Neither of us was without fault. Neither of us was without grief. We work through it the way you work through things when you've both lost the same person and you're the only ones who know exactly what that person meant. The OIG investigation moved carefully. My attorney Barbara was precise and thorough in a way that restored some of my faith in the legal system. Garrett Foss, it turned out, had continued working as a healthcare financial consultant after the Crestview case. There were 2 other billing fraud cases in Ohio and Indiana where his name appeared as a retained consultant. The pattern was unmistakable once someone looked for it. Dr. Gideon Price hired 3 attorneys. He issued 2 public statements denying any wrongdoing. His hospital network placed him on administrative leave in month 4. He resigned in month 6. My son-in-law negotiated a plea agreement. In exchange for testimony against Foss and Price, he received a reduced sentence and agreed to cooperate fully. His cooperation produced, among other things, a detailed account of how my signature had been forged and by whose specific instruction. My conviction was vacated on a Thursday morning in October. The federal judge who signed the order was not the same judge who had sentenced me. That man had retired. This one was a younger woman with an efficient manner, who nevertheless paused before signing and said to the courtroom that wrongful conviction represented a fundamental failure of the system and that this case should give every one of us pause. I stood in the courthouse hallway afterward with Nadine on one side and Barbara on the other, and I didn't know what to feel. Relief I'd expected. What I hadn't expected was how hollow it would sit inside me, how being told you were right all along after 5 years doesn't give you those years back. It just confirms what you already knew. Foss and Price were indicted. The civil settlement, negotiated separately, resulted in a payment to me that I will not put a specific number to, except to say it was enough to matter. I moved out of the extended stay in November. I found a small apartment in a quieter part of Columbus, 2nd floor, with a window that looks out onto a maple tree. I bought a blue coffee mug. I still go to Green Lawn most Sunday mornings. The roses are always yellow. Raymond usually waves from across the cemetery. Sometimes Addie is there. She's 9 now, taller, still unhurried in that particular way of hers. One Sunday she walked over and sat down beside me the way she had the very first time. "Did you figure out what you needed to figure out?" she asked. "I did," I said. She nodded, satisfied. "Then, Grandpa says you're going to start doing volunteer work for people who got sent to prison when they shouldn't have been." "That's right." She thought about this, like what you went through. Exactly like what I went through. She was quiet for a moment, picking at a loose thread on her coat sleeve. "That seems like a good use of what happened to you," she said finally, with the frank, unsentimental certainty of a child who has not yet learned to dress hard things up. I looked at Walter's stone. The morning light was doing something gentle with the grey granite. The way it sometimes does in October, the angle is just right. "Yes," I said, "I think so too. I don't have Walter's coffee anymore, and I never will again. But I have the truth he saved for me, and I have my daughter, and I have this small life I'm rebuilding, one ordinary day at a time. Some mornings that feels like enough, some mornings that feels like enough, some mornings it feels like more than I deserve. Most mornings I decide that what I deserve is no longer the right question. The right question is what I do with the time I have left. I think I'm finally starting to know the answer. I keep thinking about Walter hiding that drive inside a piece of stone because he trusted stone more than people. That detail stays with me. Not the legal victory, not the settlement, not the day the judge signed the order. Just that image of my husband, already sick, wrapping the truth in a freezer bag and sealing it somewhere they couldn't reach it. That was his whole character in one quiet act. He couldn't fight them loudly, so he fought them carefully, and carefully turned out to be enough. I've spent a lot of time thinking about why things unfolded the way they did, why the people who built that fraud eventually had it taken apart. It wasn't luck. Garrett Foss and Gideon Price communicated like men who believed they were untouchable, and that belief made them careless. They left a trail because they never seriously entertained a possibility that someone would look. They mistook my silence for defeat. They mistook Walter's illness for weakness. They were wrong on both counts, and that wrongness cost them everything they thought they'd secured. What I've come to understand is that the people who wronged me didn't fail because the universe corrected itself. They failed because of specific choices. Walter's choice to document instead of despair, Addie's choice to speak instead of stay quiet, Nadine's choice to answer the phone when she could have let it ring. Every link in that chain was a person deciding in a small moment to do the harder and more honest thing. That's not fate, that's character accumulated. I was not a perfect person before any of this happened. I was impatient sometimes, proud in ways that didn't serve me, too certain I could recognize a threat when I saw one, and so I didn't see the one that was closest. 5 years gave me a long time to sit with that, not to punish myself with it, but to actually understand it. There's a difference. Punishment keeps you in the same place. Understanding moves you somewhere. What I know now is that the only things that held up under pressure were the things built on something solid. Walter's love held up. Nadine's willingness to reckon with her own choices held up. Raymond Okafor's late arriving honesty held up. What collapsed? Foss's scheme, my son-in-law's carefully constructed story, Price's professional reputation, was everything that had been built on someone else's harm. I think about Addie sometimes when I'm working with clients at the Innocence Project, people who have been inside for 10 years, 15, 20, waiting for someone to look closely at what happened to them. She was 8 years old, and she knew something was wrong, and she said so anyway to a stranger, in a cemetery, in the drizzle. That kind of clear-eyed courage doesn't come from being fearless. It comes from trusting your own perception of what's right more than you trust your fear of being wrong. I want to be that kind of person. I'm still learning how.